Well, hey everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday night edition of the Lovecraft E-Zine podcast. As always, if you are watching live, let me know that you can see me and hear me. And on Tuesday nights, I read horror stories. And a lot of you catch them live, and a lot of you catch them later. And hello to everyone watching live, at least. Jakester, thank you. Kim, Alan, everyone else who is watching live who hasn't said anything yet. Oh, there we go. Running behind today. Hey, Scott Thomas. Speaking of Scott Thomas, hey Suzanne, remember he's got a new book out, and it's a poetry book, and Scott, Lord, my mind just did one of those blanks. I told everyone about it last Tuesday, but I'm blanking on it now, so if you'll type in the side chat, or someone remind me what it is, because it's on Kindle Unlimited if you do Kindle, and it's a great way to support someone in the E-Zine community, in the weird fiction community. Jakester, I think you got the wrong Tuesday night on that. So, oh yeah, thank you, Scott. Seasons from Ice to Grain. Available in print and Kindle. And if you do Kindle, it's on Kindle Unlimited. So, thanks for the link, Alan. Alright, so, speaking of Scott Thomas, Scott writes something that, for the most part, I call quiet horror. There are a million descriptions for what Scott does, but that's one of them. That's the one that always comes to my mind. And when I think of quiet horror, I think of guys like Charles L. Grant. And if you've not read Charles L. Grant, you really should. It's just, if you're into quiet horror, that's what you want to read. That's but apologies for my mind blanking tonight, but the reason why I'm bringing all this up is because another name that I think of when I think of quiet horror is Paul F. Olson. And one of Paul's books is called Whispered Echoes. Sorry, I'm pulling up the correct page here. Whispered Echoes. It's on Kindle. It's in print. Yeah, I believe it's on Audible as well. So it's called Whispered Echoes, Paul F. Olson, and I've got Paul's permission to read a story or two tonight. Alan says he's enjoying Scott's book. So I'm going to read the introduction from Whispered Echoes by Chet Williamson, which is, I'm sure, a name familiar to all of you. Really great guy, really great writer. And I'm not going to read the whole introduction, but just a few parts. But it begins like this. Rocks and water, trees and sky haunt Paul F. Olson's work, along with other less comfortable elements. Olson is above all a regionalist. His works, bones, sinew, muscle, and spirit all spring organically from the Upper Peninsula, the UP. That part of Michigan surrounded by 3 of the Great Lakes. While it has 29% of the state's landmass, it claims only 3% of its population so it is in Olson's own description of his home. Rugged, remote, lonely, beautiful, and quite weird. I've never been there, Paul, if you ever see this, but this is exactly my kind of place. I'm originally from Iowa, and I miss it. I live down in Texas now with my family, but I can imagine from that description, from everything I've read about it, and from Chet's introduction to the book and Paul's description, that it's a place I would really love. Monty, what are we doing over there? Sorry, my cat. He's just dying to be part of the program. As a matter of fact, there's a I just thought of this, but there's a detective series that's 25, maybe 30 years old, somewhere around in there, late 90s. And the first book, I can't remember the author's name, but the first book is, I believe it's called Another Day in Paradise. And it's set in Paradise, Michigan. And let me just try that old Google search thing. Let's see here. It would help if I knew what's going to come out of my mouth in these shows, but since I don't, it's off the cuff. Here we go. No, we don't. Anyway, if anybody figures that out while I'm talking, let me know. Type it in the side chat. But in the first book of this detective series, it's set in the winter, and one of the characters describes it as, they're right there on the lake. They're just on the other side of Canada, across the bay, I guess. Like I said, I've never been up there. And one of the characters refers to it as living on the edge of the world, which I just love. No, I don't think it's Eddie Little, Alan, but I'll recognize the name if anyone finds it. Anyway, so we're talking about the Upper Peninsula. So to resume Chet's introduction, so it is in Olson's own description of his home: rugged, remote, lonely, beautiful, and quite weird. Those very words might be used to describe Olson's fiction as well. If the works of M.R. James, master of the malevolent ghost story, and those of early Ray Bradbury were to wed an unholy union, their offspring might be something like the works of Paul F. Olson. Strange things abound in the UP's lakes and woods, and Olson slowly reveals them to us, stripping away the shadows one by one until we see them, or at least think we do. Excuse me. These stories are rich in suggestions, in glimpses, and echoes, and whispers. But don't worry. There are enough true horrors here to make the hair crawl on the neck of even the most seasoned aficionado of the horror tale. When Olson chooses to let us fully see his arcane creations, you'll be hard-pressed not to give a little gasp, to make an actual sound, to remind yourself that you are here in the real world, safe, and that this vision exists only in your imagination, lodged there by the even darker imagination of Paul F. Olson. It's uncanny how Olson's nightmares are so close to our own, but not unexpected, since one quality that we all share is guilt, and that uneasy theme weaves itself through a number of stories in this volume. There is guilt in what we've done to others, at how we've shirked our familiar responsibilities and disrupted our families, our loves, our lives. There's the horror of seeing that guilt made manifest by the return of those we betrayed, of those we loved and who loved us, but are not as they were, not as we remembered them, but as something other, lonely and quite weird indeed. And we all dream, literally sometimes, of not just our own lives turned upside down, but of the whole world turned that way as well. You'll find those moments too with the Upper Peninsula as the planet's microcosm. You may never have been to northern Michigan, but it doesn't matter, since Olson will take you there by the power of the written word and make you see in the Conradian sense. Quote, that and no more, and it is everything. Just a little bit more of this introduction, because I think it's important so that you get a taste of whether you want to read this book or not, and I really think that you do. Olson does this a simple way, or rather the way that looks simplest, but is actually the most difficult to achieve, with plain, unadorned prose, the kind the best storytellers and poets use. It creates a quiet and altogether haunting voice that has no need to grab the reader by the shirt front and order him to look at this writing, look how clever I am. Doesn't my prose sparkle and scintillate? No. Instead, Paul F. Olson says, I want to tell you a story. Sit with me and listen. It goes on for a few more paragraphs, but I will read just a little bit more of the introduction by Chet Williamson. Talking about one of the stories, he said, Bloody Bones is not only a classic ghost story, one of the stories in this collection. It's a mystery, a serial killer tale, a love story, and an adventure yarn. And it's scary. I read it in broad daylight and still felt chills. If you don't read it in darkness, don't worry. Paul Olson will supply his own. The novella is a perfect length for horror. Definitely agree with that. There's plenty of room for development, but no necessity for padding, and you won't find a superfluous sentence in Bloody Bones. What you will find is a beautifully written and constructed story, simply and elegantly told. One that will fill you with unease while you're reading it, and will remain with you long into the night and nights to come. It's the finest and most haunting story in a volume full of them. So, welcome to Paul F. Olson's Upper Peninsula, a place of deep lakes and deeper mysteries, ghosts and memories, whispers and echoes that will follow you down the wind and into the coldest chambers of the human heart. Introduction by Chet Williamson, also an introduction by Paul, which I won't read. You can read that when you buy the book. So if you guys are ready, I will read a story. I'm actually going to read the very first story, and hard to pick, but I'd say this is my favorite, which is ironic because Paul must have written this when he was a very young man. He said in his introduction that he assembled these in chronological order. Sure, I remember that right. Yeah. All right. Are you sitting comfortably? And when you guys don't say anything in the side chat for a while, I get whispered echoes that I'm not on the air anymore, since when we started this, that's happened once or twice over the years. Not very often. Anyway, this story is called The Visitor. And again, if you're just joining me, it's from Paul F. Olson's collection, Whispered Echoes. Thank you, Kelly. The Visitor. So I'm going to read it on my phone, I think. There we go. Kim says that whispering in your ear isn't me. Okay. I don't believe you, Kim. There is no more beautiful season than fall in Upper Michigan, although that is strictly opinion. Certain folks love spring above the rest, and certainly more love summer. There are even those few snowmobilers, skiers, and the most avid of the tourist haters who champion winter. But to my mind, there is nothing greater than autumn. That ain't gonna work. But to my mind, there is nothing greater than autumn and its crystalline mornings, its steady afternoon rains, its haunting winds that are never quite still, even in the quietest hours. Despite that, there is something about the season that is not quite right. Something that hasn't been quite right, in fact, since Kent Barclay began coming into town each October 1st, taking a room at Elvira Martin's boarding house, and leaving again during the first week of November. Kent Barclay. Precisely who he is, I don't know. Or maybe I do. Maybe I do, and I'm just afraid to speak it. He certainly seems harmless enough on the surface. A gentle wisp of a man, he merely strolls the narrow main street, and even narrower side streets, nodding to people, kicking at pebbles, and searching the sky, as if for treasure. Alan says, I would definitely rent a room from someone named Elvira. Made me think of Stephen King's Salem's Lot, that boarding house. I don't remember that lady's name, but on days that it rains, you can see him at his window in the boarding house. And always the same room, always room number 3 up front, second floor, looking out passively. Eva Miller, right. Eva Miller and Elvira Martin. Was Paul thinking about this when he wrote it? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe someday we'll find out from Paul. Gonna have him on the show again sometime this summer. Alright, where did I leave you? On days that it rains, you can see him at his window in the boarding house, and always the same room, always room number 3, up front, second floor, looking out passively. He smiles pleasantly, always treats our dogs and children well. He's even capable, on those occasions he's approached in the park, of holding a rather stimulating conversation. Excuse me. Perhaps what troubles me about the little fellow is only the blunt and prosaic fact that here is a man who comes into a tiny burg like Patterson Falls once a year, stays a month or thereabouts, and leaves for no apparent reason that anyone has ever been able to tell. He's never fully answered questions on that score, that much is certain. he's apt to just smile sadly and say in that fine, thin voice of his, "Vacation," or "just sightseeing." But more likely, my fear is deeper, more complicated. In fact, I know it is. It's fear of the way accidents seem to follow Kent Barclay while he's in the falls. Fear of the way those accidents grow slightly worse each year. The first year, 9 years ago, he tripped and fell over an admittedly wide and dangerous sidewalk crack along Appleton Street. He happened to fall in the path of little Billy Hardesty on his Schwinn. Billy swerved and plowed the Schwinn into a rather large oak. Both were relatively unhurt, although Billy had a nice abraded elbow to show off at the grammar school in Eichbimming the next day. I probably did not say that name right. It went on like that for several years. 1 or 2 incidents each October. No one really hurt or put out. No one really troubled. But then, was it 4 years ago? No, I believe it was 5. Barclay, on his afternoon rounds, was going into the IGA when the wind suddenly snatched the door from his hand and slammed it outward. That in itself would not have been so bad, but it just so happened that Joey Winderson was following immediately behind. Automatically, he thrust out an arthritic hand, to keep from being hit. But his hand went straight through the glass, shattering it, leaving jagged shards hanging. Yes, be careful of the IGA. According to Bob, and by the way, if you want this read better than I can do it, there is an audiobook. But for those of you who are new, Tuesday nights are about reading live and about us just sort of hanging out, chatting a little bit, and we're all in the same story together at the same time. So maybe my reads have the advantage of that. You're listening with other people, and there's something to that. Not so much this day and age when we used to always listen to a song on the radio at the same time or watch a TV show at the same time as everyone else. Alright, according to Barb Foley, who was running the register that day, Joey let out a squawk like only a startled and wounded old man could, and foolishly jerked his hand back, gashing his arm in 5 places, 3 deep enough to take stitches. After that, those of us who gathered around the card table every Saturday at Kendrick's True Value Hardware, and I must say on my own behalf that as a retired teacher from the Marquette school system, and probably the most educated person in the Falls, I still fit together in those gatherings rather well. We took to calling Little Kent Barclay the Jinx and the Curse, jokingly speculating over coffee about what sort of trouble he was going to cause next. Kim says, in the side chat, I basically don't get human contact during the week except for taking work calls, so human voices combined with a live face on the screen is good for me. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you, Kim. We didn't have long to wait. 2 weeks later, just before he left town for the year, he strolled absently across the intersection of Parsons and Appleton. directly in front of a Chevy driven by an out-of-towner salesman who had just been pitching his wares to the manager of the Knife and Fork Diner. The salesman hit the brakes a touch too hard and cracked the steering wheel, to say nothing of his skull. I believe he took 19 stitches, but I don't recall the precise number. The next year was the same. 2 people hurt to bleeding by our visitors' bumbling or clumsiness or ignorance or whatever it was. The year after that, 3 people. The year after that, 2 again. One of those was our mayor, who nearly severed 2 fingers on his left hand, trying to catch an axe that Barclay knocked off its display rack in the hardware store. Side comment, if that ever happens to you, someone knocks off the axe, don't go with your gut reaction and try to catch it. Just get out of the way, as the mayor learned the hard way. Our Saturday accusations against Barclay grew stronger, and Paul Kendricks, who had driven the mayor to the hospital in Marquette, even suggested, only half humorously, that perhaps there was some ordinance to keep such a dangerous soul out of town. Yes, you're right, Kelly, unless it's going to hit a kid or a dog or etc. What's he come here for anyhow? Joey Winderson said, touching his scarred arm ruefully. What's a fellow like that want here every year? We only looked at each other and shrugged. It was a question all of us had asked for the last 5 or 6 years, and one to which none of us had an answer. But, as always happened, by December we had more or less forgotten about Barclay and taken up the threads of our more mundane existence. His name came up only occasionally in the winter and spring and summer, and even those hurt by his blundering seemed to harbor no ill will against him during those months. His presence in Patterson Falls each October was still a mystery, but so, in their own ways, were the coming of the birds each spring, the freezing of Conley Lake each winter, the turning of the autumn leaves. You see, we had already, in one form or another, come to accept him as an ordained and exorable part of our simple lives. It wasn't until that last year, months ago now, that all began to change. For you authors and publishers out there who might be listening to find out if you want me to do one or more of your audiobooks, sure, but just bear in mind, that kind of thing, you can go back and correct your mistakes, but not live. So, it wasn't until that last year, months ago now, that all that began to change. Barclay came into town just before noon on October 1st, wheeling his little blue Pinto up to Elvira Martin's and carrying his single faded tartan suitcase inside. It was cold for that early, and raining steadily. An hour after his arrival, we saw him from the hardware store, sitting in the window of room number 3, gazing out at the somnolent main street with the blandness that had become his trademark. "Little guy's back," George Loveworth noted, tapping ash into the dregs of his coffee. "Looks that way," I said. There was a pause, and then Paul Kendricks asked the time-honored question. What do you suppose he wants here anyway? We gave him the time-honored response. Blank, silent expressions. He ain't got no family around, Kendricks said, persisting. Not even what you'd call friends. All he does is walk around in circles and set up in that window there. I don't know. I just don't get it. That was the extent of our Kent Barclay discussions that first day. There was no mention of the accidents, although I suppose all of us were wondering just when the first one would happen, just what it would be. For a while it appeared that we were going to be disappointed that year. There was usually one incident during Barclay's first week in the falls, one or two more during his last. This time, however, the first 3 weeks of his visit passed uneventfully. Perhaps using hindsight, I could attribute that to the fact that it rained almost continuously during those weeks. Barclay was rarely seen outside. Still, he was at his window every day, like a silent but certainly sentient guardian, or a prisoner staring out longingly at the streets of freedom. Then one day the rain stopped. The next morning, the sodden pavement gleamed in the early sunlight. Barclay was up, according to our chief of police, Harv Benedict, by 7 o'clock, strolling down Main, turning almost absently at Bridgeton, and swinging past the old abandoned school. Benedict told us later, but not in his official capacity, that he had been out on morning rounds when he passed Barclay, that he nodded and said hello, received a similar greeting back. All perfectly ordinary. It was what followed later that morning that was not ordinary at all, that shattered routine and changed our muddled thinking about Barclay for good. It happened around 11:30, and on this, I don't need to rely on second-hand accounts. I was there. I saw it. I saw it all. I was out on morning rounds of my own, enjoying the crispness and the just-wash freshness of the day, breathing in great lungs full of air, watching drenched, dull-brown leaves drop limply to the earth. I had stopped by the post office to say hello to Vinnie Pierce, then by the IGA to greet Barb Foley and buy a roll of certs. Ooh, I remember certs, yes. My next stop was John Barlow's State Farm office. I was inside with John, chewing over the local high school football scene and the high cost of getting by when Barclay ambled past the big picture window out front. There he goes, John said. It was a simple statement, and I saw no need of reply. John went on, strange little guy, don't you think? Nice enough, though. I nodded and savored his certs. At least he's staying out of trouble this year. We laughed over that and swiveled a few degrees to watch his progress down the street. It was about that time that things seemed to me to suddenly slow down, as though we were watching film on a screen and the projectionist had pulled some lever marked slow motion or low gear or whatever. Later, remembering with John, he said it was nearly the same for him. Vaguely unreal. Not at all a comfortable feeling. We saw Barclay moving casually along, then moments later saw the front door of Bud McKinnon's house swing open. Saw little Sarah McKinnon dart out. I remember thinking it was strange Sarah would not be in school. She was at least 8 years old. And then realized it was Friday, the end of the first grading period of the year. The grammar school was out until Monday. Sarah was clearly in a hurry, charging forth to meet some friend or to complete some errand for her mother, for she madly scrambled along the sidewalk, a large grin on her face, something clutched in one chubby fist. It did not take her long to catch up with Barclay. That was when it happened. The end. Good night. Not kidding. As she attempted to pass Barclay on his right, the visitor quickly and agilely, without so much as glancing over his shoulder, sidestepped in that direction. Sarah McKinnon skidded on the steel-damp pavement and almost fell. But like most children, she was blessed with a natural grace and regained her balance. She did not seem deterred at all and simply swung to the left. Barclay, still walking, still not looking back, moved right with her, blocking her path. "What the hell does he think he's doing?" John said, and it seemed as though his voice came from a great distance. I did not answer. I had no answer, but I felt a very palpable sense of impending trouble gathering in my chest. I had no idea what the trouble would be, but I knew, as surely as I knew the date and the name of my town, as surely as I knew my name, that it was coming. I had never experienced anything quite like it before, and I clutched the windowsill as though it were a life ring and watched. Out on the sidewalk, I saw Sarah, half running, half walking now, swing right, then left, then right again. Each time, wispy little Kent Barclay moved with her, moved ahead of her, blocking her route. They had reached the corner of Winslow and Main, crossed into the next block. Barclay continued to amble on, as though unaware of the child behind him trying to pass. Yet, he couldn't truly be unaware, could he? No, of course not. He was playing a game with the girl. They were old friends from the park or the playground behind the municipal building, and this was just a game they played when they happened to meet. A tradition, a ritual. But I did not believe it. That sense of trouble had mounted, like a squeezing hand around my heart, and I could only watch and wonder what in the name of God that crazy little tourist thought he was doing. Then, outside, Sarah McKinnon, surely irritated now, made her move. I have no doubt she saw only two options. One, veer wide to the right across the front lawns of the houses, and two, veer left into the street. Yes, even to this day, I am quite certain the most sensible courses of action, taking another route, or slowing, or stopping, waiting for Barclay to disappear in the distance, never even entered her eager 8-year-old mind. And so she did what any impatient youngster would do. She She chose from the two options she saw, and she chose what she doubtless thought was the simplest, which in this case, since she was already to the far left of the sidewalk, meant darting out into the street. I heard the car before I saw it, heard its dreadfully squealing tires as the driver floored the brakes, heard the protesting wail of its horn. Then I saw it flash into video. Oh, that's wrong. Then I saw it flash into view. Saw it strike the running girl. And then I heard the final sound. The final sound, that is, until the shouting began. Moments later, I heard the dull and thickening sound of the girl being hit. Jesus, John Barlow said. Jesus. Barclay simply kept on strolling, not glancing back as though nothing at all had happened. I remember the next hours only dimly, as though I viewed them through a sheet of gauze or through a thick fog bank that distorted thought as well as vision. I remember John and I running to the scene. I remember the shocked white face of the driver, his protests that he hadn't seen her, that she had just run in front of him, just like that, my God, just right out in front. I remember the volunteer ambulance pulling up. I remember Dr. McCauley coming and pronouncing her dead. I remember her sobbing mother, her goggling 3-year-old brother. Most of all, I remember the sudden new loathing I felt for Kent Barclay. I remember all that, but as I just stated, I remember it only vaguely, as though from a dream. The early minutes of our gathering in the True Value the next morning were bleak and silent. Then things turned quickly and bitterly angry. John and I were the only ones who had witnessed the accident, the only ones who had seen the bizarre little duel on the sidewalk prior. The others were perfectly willing to believe us, however, as though they had been quietly waiting all these years for something tangible to pin on our annual visitor. Pardon me. Still, we all knew there was nothing legally to be done. There is no actual law against lurching back and forth on the sidewalk, impeding the progress of an impatient 8-year-old girl. And he hadn't forced her to run into the street. Even if he had, there was no way we could prove it. Certainly no way we could prove he had known the car was coming. But if our legal channels were nil, there seemed to be a harsh consensus around the card table that morning that our moral course was open and extremely clear-cut. "We gotta kick the bastard out," Paul Kendrick said. "I don't know what his game is, but we don't need him in the falls." Joey Winderson coughed and nodded. "Should have done it long ago." A brief silence ensued, and then Frank Bishop said, "Think we could keep him from coming back next year?" Kendricks laughed jaggedly. Damn right we can. Our town, ain't it? We'll just tell him he ain't welcome. Tell him if he shines his pussy-looking face round here next fall, we'll kick him right out. Kick him out, hell. We'll kill the bastard. Law, I said weakly. Fuck the law, Joey Wenderson said. We got a duty. He can count himself lucky we ain't gonna walk over there and kill him right now. I nodded, despite my newfound hate for Barclay. I had no doubt he could consider himself very lucky indeed. There was some short discussion of who would get the honor of speaking to Barclay. Harv Benedict was suggested and rejected. We all knew the police chief had a difficult enough time mustering the courage to hand out a speeding ticket. He could not be entrusted with such a delicate matter as this, even assuming he could be convinced that Barclay had to go. Then Frank Bishop looked at me and said, "How about you, Matthew?" My eyes widened, but before I could protest, there was round after round of agreement from the others. I was well-spoken and diplomatic, yet just tough enough from my many years in the North to make my words stick. It was that old specter of superior education and experience come to haunt me at last. Besides that, it was pointed out, I believed as deeply as any of them that Barclay was dangerous. And I had been there when Sarah McKinnon was killed. That gave me the additional ammunition. After one or two flimsy arguments, I agreed. I had no doubt in my mind that Barclay should go. That Patterson Falls would be infinitely better off without him. I did doubt, however, our position if the little man should decide to press his legal right to vacation or sightsee where he wished. Still, what choice did I have? In my new angered state of mind, it seemed to have come down to an us or him proposition. The next day, Sunday, it rained again. And as I approached Elvira Martin's boarding house, I looked up and saw him standing in the window of room number 3, simply looking out. And I felt my loathing wash back over me like a wave of hot water. And now it's time for a commercial break. Now, listen, real quick, if you're listening to this edition of the podcast, and you're here for you like the Sunday podcast, the Thursday one, and those podcasts, then you really should be a Patreon. Almost all, if not all, definitely 99% of the podcasts that we do for Patreons only is available at the bottom level of $5 a month. So there's a hell of a lot more that you can listen to for that small amount. And right now I don't know, I can't remember how many years I've been doing this Patreon, but there are a lot to listen to, some really great ones too. The deep background series, getting into, I guess you'd say, the nitty-gritty of a creator. Interviews with people like Ramsey Campbell and Laird. John Langan is my most recent victim of the Deep Background series, and other kinds of of series in the Patreon podcasts. And the latest one is we are reading Lovecraft stories and then discussing them. So the series is a discussion of Lovecraft stories. So far we've done Call of Cthulhu, The Temple. We just started doing this about a month ago. Can't remember the one we did last. But anyway, you get the idea. And we're doing The Haunter of the Dark next, and then after that, pretty sure we're going to do At the Mountains of Madness. And they're really fun discussions. The patrons seem to really like them. If you're a patron and you're watching live, let everybody know if you feel like it. If you're near your keyboard. But I hope you'll consider it, because quite literally, I can't do this without the Patreon. It's literally the only thing that keeps this plucky little boat of Lovecraftian and weird fiction horror afloat. So I hope you think about it, and at higher tiers there are some other great benefits. So I won't bore you with all of them, but just Google Lovecraft Easing Patreon, or you can go to patreon.com/Lovecraft Easing. So commercial over, but yeah, I could use the help to keep this going. So thanks to those of you who are listening that already are patrons. Really appreciate it. Where did I leave off? Okay. The first moments of our meeting in the dingy but astringently neat little room were harmless enough. He remembered me from occasional encounters in previous years, and even remembered to inquire if I missed teaching. However, when I came to the subject at hand, the tension seemed to mount almost immediately. "Leave," Barclay repeated, his bland little face clouding. "Leave town?" I nodded. "As soon as possible." "I'm afraid I don't understand." I took a deep breath and attempted to explain to him our position. Explain how the mounting accidents over the years had changed our good opinion of him. How it would be better for all involved if he were to just slip away and forget about the falls. I withheld mention of Sarah McKinnon and what John Barlow and I had seen, thinking rather obscurely that I might need that as leverage later. Barclay heard me out politely enough, but his expression grew darker by the moment. When I was finished, he leaned toward me so quickly that I thought for one absurd moment he was going to strike. But instead, he merely coughed and then leaned back, frowning. "You have no legal right," he said. "I realize that, Mr. Barclay. We all realize that. But you've got the town set on edge. Some are talking about violence. Now, don't you think it would be better for everyone if you just... Violence? Violence? Because of a few harmless accidents? You have no right. You have no grounds. Mr. Barclay, there's no sense in arguing about it. The town's made up its mind, and you're not likely to change it. Now, you're going to leave today, and you're not going to come back next year. If you feel such an urgent need to sightsee in this area, why don't you try Ishpeming or Michigami or Champion? Why don't you go north to the copper country? All very lovely, I can assure you. Just don't come back to Patterson Falls. Yeah, exactly, Kim. I think that every time I reread this story, Barclay with his harmless accidents speech. Just don't come back to Patterson Falls. For a moment, he said nothing. He merely stared at me. I thought my cool enforcer posture had been successful. Then he smiled. A sweet, dripping, horribly sickening smile, and said, "I'm afraid that would be impossible, Mr. Jacobs. And you'd better go back and tell your friends I said so." "There's no such thing as impossible, Barclay." "Oh, indeed there is. I have work to do here. I must come back." I almost laughed. Work? What work? Walking around the streets, looking at the sky, herding children on bikes, making old men put their hands through glass doors, knocking axes off the wall in the hardware store? I felt my reserve crumbling, my anger come boiling through. But anger mixed with an odd glee, as though I had been waiting for this moment a long time. "What work?" I grinned maniacally. "Forcing little girls into the street so they get struck by cars?" I expected some expression of surprise at that statement, but I was disappointed. He only maintained that nauseating smile, and there was something else. Something above the smile. It was in his eyes, a dark look of gleaming hatred. Or perhaps it wasn't hatred. Perhaps it was, I don't know. But it was there. And it drove an ice shard of fear into my heart. I felt the pain of it and drew back as he spoke his next words. "I think that's all, Mr. Jacobs. Be sure to tell everyone what I said. Good day now." I opened my mouth to speak, but could find no words. The pain in my chest was now above the tight constriction of simple unease. It was shattering. I rose, backed away, and fumbled my way out the door. I was halfway down the stairs when I lost consciousness. I stayed in the hospital nearly 2 months. The doctor said I was extremely fortunate. It was a massive heart attack, he said. The kind that frequently refuses to give folks my age a second chance. I'm back in town now, though, spending my time much the way I spent it before, only at a much slower pace. There were some days in July and August when I had to forego the Saturday sessions at the True Value, when it was just too hot, too stunningly humid to consider the long walk downtown, the strain of the discussions. But I don't have to worry about that anymore. It's September, you see, and the weather has turned blessedly cool and most pleasant. He's coming back. I admit there were times throughout the bleak winter months when I tried to delude myself into thinking Barclay was bluffing. After all, he was just a little wisp of a man. I must have intimidated him somewhat. Even in spring and summer, I clung to that hope, foolish as it was. Barclay was bluffing. The attack was just ugly coincidence. But it's autumn now, the time of beauty, the dying time of leaves and grass and foolish dreams. He's coming back. He has work to do here. There is nothing I can do, nothing any of us can do to alter that. In some comic, horrible way, he's like an absurd little postman, refusing to be strayed. Excuse me, ruining that line. In some comic, horrible way, he's like an absurd little postman, refusing to be stayed from his duties. Work to do. I wonder why. And oh God, I wonder what it's going to be this year. That was The Visitor by Paul F. Olson, and it's in his collection Whispered Echoes, which I can't recommend highly enough. You can, if you want to watch and or listen to the interview we did with Paul, I can't remember when it was, maybe 2 years ago, something like that, maybe 3, I don't know. Just go to the YouTube channel that you're on right now, and you can search YouTube channels, as I'm sure you all know, and just type in his name, type in his last name, it'll probably bring you right to it. Really nice guy, really great writer. I asked him for permission to read a story, and he said that I had blanket permission. Yes, there's a train coming. You guys can't always hear them, but sometimes I really like it. I like the sound of it. Especially you wake up in the middle of the night and you hear that lonesome whistle, and it's not so close that it's annoying, for me anyway. The tracks are about, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 6, standard city blocks away, whatever standard means, but something like that. And I would hate to be living in one of the houses right next door, that's for sure. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know you enjoyed the story, because you can't not enjoy that story, but I hope you enjoyed my reading of it. And I believe I'm remembering correctly that it's available on Audible as well. Let me put that in the side chat for you guys. How about that before I go? So while I'm doing that, how's everybody doing tonight? Let's see. Whispered Echoes. Let me grab that URL for you. 1 second. And I wanted to see who reads that too. It is narrated by a Scott MacDonald, M-A-C Donald. See what else he's got here in this. Oh, he narrated Strangewood by Christopher Golden. He's got a lot in here. The Hollower by Mary Sangiovanni. Who else do I know? Rick Hadala books. And yeah, quite a bit of them here. I do have it on Audible, and I seem to remember that was really well read. So, oh, and The Shadow Man by Joseph J. Cristiano. I don't know who that is, but I like that title, The Shadow Man. For Nick Wade, life was an endless series of heroin-fueled highs and lows. Alienated from most of his remaining family, Nick leads a vagabond existence as one of West Philly's lost addicts. Doesn't look like a horror audiobook, but I still like the title. Yeah, so check out Whispered Echoes by Paul Olson. And let's see here. Kim says things aren't going too bad at the moment. Also says, worked at a Walgreens location that was right next to a train track, and a train would come along every few minutes. We'd literally have to pause what we were saying to the patients until it passed. Wow. And Kim says, not too bad at the moment. Alan says, sorry for the loss of your cat, Kim. Kim, I guess I missed it. I'm sorry. I didn't know your cat passed away. I know how hard it is. I'm sorry you're going through that. Kelly says, back in college, I lived right near them in Norman, Oklahoma. Scott says, great reading. Thanks, Mike. A really well done story. Yeah, he's a great writer. All right, yeah, and be sure to pick up Scott's new poetry book, and I will see all of you on Thursday at the same bat time, same bat channel, 10 p.m. Eastern, and the Sunday podcast, 6 p.m. Sunday, where our guest will be Kenneth Haidt. He is always so interesting to talk to. So, anyway, thanks for spending part of your Tuesday night with me, guys. Scott, have a good weekend. You got Wednesdays and Thursdays off, right? So, everyone have a good night, and I'll see you on Thursday.